Okay, I hope this is working. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to check in with Tan and Carol to make sure that the sound is working. I think the technology aspect of this is what I'm most nervous about. I'm really good at talking about my teaching and telling stories, but um, I'm hoping that everything else works out. There should be a chat function on the side of the screen so that if you have any comments throughout my presentation, feel free to make them. And you can also tweet with @topple_ELD, and I'll be checking my Twitter feed throughout the presentation so that I can get your feedback and answer your questions. Today's presentation is called Enhancing the Script. And it's about how to ensure that you are using cultural responsive practices, even if you are using a prescribed curriculum. I created this presentation for another conference within the state of Oregon where I live. And I have a lot of slides with visuals, so I am going to switch over so that you can see my slide presentation, and then I will toggle back. Before I do that, I want to show a couple of resources that I will refer to that have been really key in my understanding of culturally responsive teaching. The first one is Geneva Gay's book, Culturally Responsive Teaching. This one is a really more theoretical, but her 4 elements of culturally responsive teaching have been very influential in my understanding of what it means. The second one is Culturally and Linguistically Responsive Teaching and Learning, which is by Shiraki Hawley. This is an amazing resource for practical elements that you can implement right away in your teaching. The appendix in itself is a goldmine, so I highly recommend this. And the last one is Zaretta Hammond's book, which we're currently reading for ELL Chat Book Club. And this is quickly becoming my favorite. I'm wearing my I Love Geneva pin because she was my kind of my mentor in learning about culturally responsive teaching. But Zaretta Hammond is quickly becoming my favorite. This book is amazing, and it's based on neuroscience, which you can't beat that. You can't argue with neuroscience. So this is also an amazing resource. So I'm going to switch over to my slides, and hopefully that works out. I'm just going to check in, and hopefully everybody's hearing me. Let me go to my slides. There they are. So hopefully that is what you are seeing right now. When I started student teaching, it was an amazing time because I was able to essentially make up everything I taught, and I love that. I was able to use my creativity, and I was able to really connect with the students and choose resources that reflected what was popular at the time and what the kids liked. I was in a 3rd grade classroom, and I just remember being sad on Friday afternoons because I didn't want to go home. I just loved it. Since I became an actual teacher, every single topic, every single content area has been used with a scripted curriculum. My district has a scripted math curriculum. We use math expressions. We have a scripted reading curriculum, which is journeys. And now we even have a scripted curriculum for ELD. So everything is scripted. And when I started to do my dissertation research and really look into what it means to be culturally responsive, much of the research on culturally responsive instruction and culturally responsive pedagogy aligns much better with a kind of a constructivist classroom approach. And I really had this hard time understanding how I could combine all of these prescribed programs that I had and this desire to be connecting with my students. So that was kind of what became my research focus, because there's not a lot out there that guides teachers how to do that. When you have a scripted program, usually the message is that you need to implement that program with fidelity and that you need to teach it as it is written, using the materials in that sequence for the particular times that are allotted, as it's written. And I'm really not, I'm not a believer in that. Not to say that the curriculum doesn't have valuable elements, because of course it does, but I'm a firm believer that the teacher really needs to implement the curriculum for the particular students that he or she is teaching. It cannot be this kind of just script that gets implemented year after year after year in the same exact ways. because the students that come in and out of your classroom are different and they have different needs. A piece of research that I really enjoyed was an article by Brooke Eisenbach that was published in 2012. And she talks about these three different personalities of teachers when it comes to scripted curriculum. So there's the accommodator who does it by the book. As it's written, the teacher does it by the book and doesn't necessarily make changes according to who they're teaching. They're just doing it as it's written because that's what the research says. It's a little robotic. Then there's the rebel. The rebel essentially puts the curriculum on the shelf and says, I'm not going to do that, and does whatever they want. The final one is the negotiator, and this is where I really think there's a win-win. The negotiator takes the scripted curriculum and uses it in a way that's best for the particular students he or she is teaching, and also infuses that scripted curriculum with materials and content and ideas and strategies that work for the teacher and that work for the student. And that's what I like to do, because I feel like being the accommodator had me losing my creativity in teaching, and that didn't feel good. And so I really like to make sure that I'm still able to express my own creativity while using the scripted curriculum. So there's certain elements that I always make sure to maintain as they are. And then there's certain elements that I take some liberties with in adjusting so that they fit the needs of my students. Geneva Gay has these four areas of culturally responsive teaching, which I really, really love. She starts with culturally responsive caring, and this is paramount because we need to care about our students and we need to know them in order to have the avenue to make adjustments to our teaching. She talks about culture and communication in the classroom, that we need to make sure we're asking students to communicate in ways that they're comfortable with and in ways that challenge them linguistically. Cultural congruity in teaching and learning, we need to convey knowledge through students' cultural learning styles. So some of those traditional ways that we teach, where there's one student raising their hand at a time, that may not work for our students. So we need to be familiar with how they learn and adjust accordingly. And the final one is ethnically and culturally diverse curriculum content, which is the element that is most challenging when you're given a prescribed curriculum, because you don't necessarily have the liberty to change the content of what is included in the lessons. So I really focus on the other three areas as ways where you can take liberties and make those adjustments to make sure your instruction is appropriate for your students. So of these four areas, we're going to talk about caring, we're going to talk about communication, and we're going to talk about instructional delivery. As I've read a lot about in culturally responsive teaching in the brain and Geneva Gay's work, culturally responsive caring is paramount. We need to be familiar with what our students know, the schema that they bring to the table, their funds of knowledge. We need to know about their families. We need to know about their background. We need to know about their home life. We need to know about their strengths and weaknesses and what they're good at, what they enjoy, and then their personality. There are a lot of personality factors that can affect what students are willing to do in the classroom and what they're not willing to do. I'm just checking in with Tan and Carol to make sure that my sound is okay. I noticed that some people are leaving, and I want to make sure it's not because they can't hear. Just to tell a few stories, my school this year had a training on home visits, and we were not mandated to do home visits, but we were encouraged to do home visits. And I cannot express how valuable getting that glimpse into a student's home is in terms of just seeing where they're going home to after school, what's in their home, what's on the walls, what they play with or what they don't play with. Are there books available? What kind of smells are there in the kitchen? There's so many points of information that teachers can gather from that home visit, and you can really start to see what the family is passionate about and what they choose to express to you in a home visit really can forge a deeper connection. I had a student this year who asked me around Christmas time if we could make gingerbread houses, because he had done that in my kindergarten class. He's now a fourth grader. We had planned to do this activity the last day before winter break, and we happened to have a snow day. And so rather than say, oh, well, can't do it, I called up his parents and I said, can I come over? I have all these materials. And so a colleague and I went to their apartment and we made gingerbread houses with my student and his older brother and his younger sister, who will be a kindergartner in the fall. And that experience was so special. And this particular student, he struggles in school, but I have that connection with him and I know so much about him that it helps me to engage him when I need him to perform academically, because I know what's going to get him. I know what types of activities I can do that he will be engaged in, and how to make them scaffolded for him so that he can be successful. I love this quote from Eric Jensen's book on poverty. Many kids from low-income homes have not had the exposure to books, museums, or travel that would help them connect with texts. But many kids from middle and upper income homes have not had the life experiences that kids from poverty have had. So it's really about knowing your students and what experiences they have, what their funds of knowledge are, because maybe they don't have an entire library of books in their bedroom, and maybe they don't go to the symphony or museums or travel to exotic places like some more privileged students do. But maybe they have critical thinking skills because they've had to figure out how to navigate life experiences that other kids their age haven't had to. Maybe they've had to care for their younger siblings because of their parents' work circumstances, and therefore they know caretaking skills, and they know what to do when a little brother or sister gets hurt. Maybe they have experiences that we would never tap into if we didn't know them enough to ask them questions to get at that. So we need to really know our students' backgrounds so that we can take that information and incorporate it into our instruction. When it comes to instruction, we can take some liberties with instructional delivery, in that a teacher could take the same prescribed lesson as a teacher in a neighboring classroom and teach it in an entirely different way based on their choices of instructional delivery. If teachers are to do effective culturally responsive teaching, they need to understand how ethnically diverse students learn. This is necessary because the process of learning, not the intellectual capacity to do so, used by students from different ethnic groups, are influenced by cultural socialization. So we need to know their culturally patterned learning styles. And Zaretta Hammond talks a lot about how all brains are wired in the same ways. And so that becomes a very cultural element, that brains are wired for collaborative practices, and brains are wired for solving puzzles and uncovering patterns and things like that. So when we incorporate those types of activities into our classroom, they're automatically culturally responsive, because we're responding to those needs of kind of human universalities. There are many elements of cultural differences that just don't align with the way we traditionally do school. School can traditionally be very individualistic, and a lot of cultures are very cooperative, and they have more of a interdependence on one another, and they want to work together rather than get credit for working by themselves. We're often very competitive, and not all students relate to that. That's not necessarily a bonus. And so we need to know whether our students are going to be motivated and excited for competition, or if a competition is going to make them feel disengaged. We know about that affective filter. We don't want their affective filter coming up because of the ways in which we're asking them to demonstrate their knowledge or dig into the content that we're teaching. We tend to be objective, yet there's a lot of cultural elements that are subjective, and we need to make sure that we're not missing out on something that a student brings to the table because of a specific way that we want to conduct a lesson. Also, attention span. We're thinking that we need students to be paying attention in a certain way, and that students should look a certain way in the classroom, but culturally that can look different. So the first bottom line is knowing students well enough to know what those cultural differences are, and then incorporating that into our instruction to make sure that everyone's comfortable and everyone can demonstrate their best self. When I did my research on how to make sure culturally responsive pedagogy can be intertwined with the use of a prescribed curriculum, the teachers that I interviewed came up with kind of some categories of the keep and categories of what could be changed. And so they felt it was really important to keep lesson objectives and vocabulary and skills intact, so that when those are outlined in the curriculum, those should not be changed in order to maintain the integrity of the program. Yet pacing and lesson delivery are two aspects that can be completely changed without interfering with the heart of the curriculum. So when it comes to pacing, sometimes we need to make our instruction fit a specific calendar. Therefore, it's not necessarily going to be done as it's written in the curriculum. We need to adjust it. Sometimes we need to sequence lessons differently or reorganize the lessons. And sometimes we need to just slow down the pacing. We need to give ELLs think time so that they can process all of this content. So pacing is something that in my mind is really flexible. I don't see that you need to adhere to the specific pacing of the curriculum that you have, because you need to make it fit your kids. If those students need 3 days on content that was meant to be one lesson, that's okay. If it's something that they can move quickly through because they really connect to it, that's okay too. The other side of it is lesson delivery. So making sure that you're including cooperative learning, adding supplementary texts where all students can be visible. Hands-on activities. Carlotta just talked a lot about manipulatives for ELLs. That's a great idea. So what can they do that's hands-on that's going to replace a traditional worksheet? Using self-created examples. And so making sure that you're always maintaining that connection with your students in what you're demonstrating to them and what you're asking them to do. Of course, music and chants and songs, all of those things that can be added by the teacher. It gives creative teachers that opportunity to incorporate more of themselves into the instruction, incorporate more of the students, and more opportunities for the students to engage. And then there's games. I recently had an experience where I was asking my fourth graders to talk about the Oregon Trail, because that's what they were working on in their classrooms. And they griped and complained and said that they missed the instruction when they come to ELD and they couldn't come up with anything. And I felt like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be talking about this. It seems like they're not there. And then I just changed my direction. I said, when I was in school, we had this really cool Oregon Trail game, and you went through this kind of experience where good things would happen to you and you would get further in the game and continue, and then negatives would happen and you would have to, possibly your character died, or you would have to move back or lose points. I said, what if we came up with a game? And then we started to brainstorm ideas of, well, what would help us move forward in the board game, and what would stop us in our tracks or have us move backwards. And they were firing off ideas. And we came up with pages of ideas of things like, you get bitten by a snake, you don't have any more water, you don't have any food, the axle on your wagon breaks, you go through water and it's flooded and your wagon breaks, or you can't move forward. Just idea after idea after idea. All of a sudden, when it was in the context of creating a game and then playing a game, they were super excited and engaged in what we were talking about, and they demonstrated a lot of content knowledge. So it wasn't until I just kind of changed that frame of reference from let's talk about content to let's make a game that they just completely did a 180 in demonstrating what they knew and engaging with the content. Zaretta Hammond talks about 3 really easy ways to make any lesson more culturally responsive. She says, gamify it. She says, make it social, and storify it. So when we take a concept and we turn it into a game where students have to employ skills like using problem solving or making connections between concepts, Zaretta says that this is automatically culturally responsive because it taps into brain science and what brains are wired to do. So regardless of the specific cultural background of your students, if you're having them engage in these game-like activities where they're making connections and problem solving and finding relationships between things and engaging in these higher order thinking skills, it's culturally responsive right there. Make it social. Have students rely on each other and interact with each other. And that is automatically, again, culturally responsive because many cultures are collaborative. I was doing something recently, a classroom management system where students earn a token called a brain buck for critical thinking or using vocabulary words, working really hard, things like that. And I had them put their brain bucks into an individual pocket, and when they collected 10, they could earn a prize. And that was all well and good. And I went to hear Zaretta talk, and I decided to make a shift in this. And I said, all right, well, what if we come up with a class prize and students can decide on what they want to earn as a class and then contribute their brain bucks to kind of a collective pot rather than their individual pot? And wouldn't you know, that became a lot more popular. They decided together as a group what they wanted to work for. And in one group, it was having a technology party where they could bring phones or iPads and play games. In another group, it was making slime. In another group, it was bringing stuffed animals and doing art. And so it really depended on what the group wanted to do. And then they could earn a set amount of brain bucks, and they were so excited to contribute. and collectively win that prize. And so very few students from that point forward put their brain bucks in their individual envelope. It was more about for the good of the cause and for the class prize. And then the element of storifying it. And what Soretta means by that is responds to stories, and that students can remember information more effectively when they can recall it in a story. And this draws from oral traditions and cultures that rely heavily on the spoken word as opposed to the written word in order to pass on traditions and tell stories. I can remember teaching my second graders about finding text evidence. And it wasn't really sticking, and they were having a hard time remembering the term text evidence, and they were having a hard time kind of with that academic language. And so I decided to tell a story. I think the word evidence was tripping them up, and so I told them about how we kind of have to be detectives and we use evidence, and how my husband, Mr. Topple, always leaves evidence of whatever he's done after I've gone to bed. And whenever I wake up, I can tell exactly what he's done because I find the evidence. I find the popcorn, the bowl with the popcorn kernels, or I find the can of what he was drinking, or I find, the container left out. And maybe it's because he's messy, but all those pieces of evidence help me to understand what he did in the bigger picture. And then we connected it back to that text evidence. We need to find that evidence, be those detectives. And they liked that. They liked hearing about somebody from my family, and they connected with that and engaged with that more so than when I was just talking about kind of the technical words that went along with the lesson. So putting it into a story allows students to really connect better and remember the information that you're sharing. The fundamental aim of culturally responsive pedagogy is to empower ethnically diverse students through academic success, cultural affiliation, and personal efficacy. Knowledge in the form of curriculum content is central to this empowerment. To be effective, the knowledge must be accessible to students and connected to their lives and experiences outside of school. So this element here is that we can't just take a prescribed curriculum and deliver it as is, because there's no guarantee that it's going to connect to the students. There's no guarantee that we can forge that bridge between what they know and their background and what we are meant to teach. Often the prescribed programs really connect better with upper middle class students, or students who are not from poverty, or who are not from homes where English is not the predominant language, not to the bilingual students. And so we need to be able to take that prescribed curriculum and then make those bridges so that it does connect to our students. So again, that relationship piece helps us know those avenues to connect with our students. And we also need to be able to ask them and to kind of open that pathway for them to contribute, so that we can help to forge those connections so that they can be connected with the content that we're teaching. Some of the things, I have some pictures now of some of the things that I've done in my ELD classroom to try to make content more relevant to students. So in the curriculum, we were to teach about nouns, person, place, and thing. This is in kindergarten in the curriculum, nouns, teaching person, place, and thing. So I felt, what would be more relevant than taking the people who teach them and putting their photos up? So there's a picture of the music teacher, and there's a picture of the kindergarten teachers. They were so excited to see their teachers' pictures on my wall. It really helped them understand the difference between those people who teach them and then the places where they're taught and the things that they use. When we were talking about different content words, again in kindergarten, of what students do at school, and I was aiming to teach them about present progressive verb forms, I added their pictures in conjunction with a daily schedule that shows what they actually do in their kindergarten classroom. So they've got reading, writing, recess, ELD, lunch, math, PE, music, and snack. And we talked about what students do in each of those areas. And then we put their photos. So one student would ask, what is Jonathan doing at school? And then another student would have to respond, he is, and then look to find Jonathan's picture on that schedule, see that he's in writing, and then say he is writing in his classroom. Somebody else might ask, what is Alberto doing at school? He is speaking English in ELD. And I was encouraging them to stretch their sentences, and they loved it, because when it was their turn to be the student with their picture in the pocket chart, they were just so excited. And it made it more relevant because it was about them. It wasn't just about some kids in school. It was about them and their day, as it really truly looks. My fourth graders this year were learning about informative writing. And part of informative writing is explaining how to do something. And at the time we were preparing for ELPA 21, which is their language proficiency assessment that we use in Oregon. And so I had them explain how they could do well on the test, because it engaged them in thinking about the strategies that they should use. And it also engaged them in the process of explanatory writing. So this student came to the United States in third grade. And at the point that she wrote this essay, she had only been in the US for about a year. And her writing is incredible, and her voice shines through, which I love. I love her conclusions. I really hope you try hard after reading this, sincerely. And then she signed her name. Her introduction. Today we're going to learn how to do well on ELPA 21. She speaks and her voice comes through in her writing like she's a teacher. Let's learn how to read carefully. So many positives and strengths in this piece because it was relevant to what they were gearing up to do in their actual instruction. In first grade, we talked about families. So rather than talk about arbitrary verbs, I asked the kids, what do you do with your family? I honestly probably would not have put go to church. One of my students put that, and she was so proud of that. Many, many times when she was asked to put a verb in about what she does with her family, her choice was go to church. That's awesome. That let me know her better. So I put this visual on my wall so that students could know which family members we were talking about. And again, typically the book said put mom, dad, sister, brother. One of my students had a stepmom. And so that step element became really important. So we added stepmom, we added stepdad, and then they even wanted to add stepsister, stepbrother, because that's what was relevant to their families. And that's really important. And then students got to ask and answer questions about what their various family members do. And it got to be true to their families because they were the ones to come up with all of those verbs: sing, shop, work, walk outside, hike, go to the circus. I probably wouldn't have thought of that, but that was important to one of the students. Ride bikes, play, laugh, and then go to church. When we were talking about opinion writing, I asked them to write about what makes their mom a rock star. And it was amazing to hear what they had to say about their moms. The theme that came out from all of their writing, this was in first grade, was how hard mom works. And that was really special to me because I think that my child would probably say something about I'm special because maybe I cuddle them or I buy them things or something like that. And the focus of every single one of my first graders was on how hard their mom works. My mom is a rock star because she's a great worker. She works at Mizume Buffet and she brings food to the customers. Good words in there. The other one, what makes your mom a rock star? My mom is a rock star because she works hard for me, because she loves me always. So asking them about something that was relevant to them yielded really great writing, and it helped me understand them better and know something really important about their family and how their families function. When students were doing, again, this was narrative writing. I was going to say informative, but narrative writing. Rather than have students write about something that that I didn't know about, I had them write about a field trip that they took. So they went to go see Fly Guy the musical, and then they wrote a mini book about the sequence of events and what they did. So they incorporated academic language by using sequencing words. They used past tense verbs, and they shared about this experience that they all had been through together. And so it was great for us to talk about it because it wasn't a situation where each student had a different story that they were trying to tell about. It was a shared experience that all of the first graders had done together. And so there was a lot of good, rich discussion where we brainstormed all the different parts of the trips before they went to write about it. So the student wrote about, today we went to watch Fly Guy the musical. First, we went on the school bus. Then we watched Fly Guy the musical in a theater in Portland. The show was great. Last, we went back to school and we went to music. So because we were able to discuss that shared experience, students were able to use some great language in their writing. Last year, my first graders were doing a unit on recycled crayons. And one of our ELP standards is that they can kind of retell a sequence of events. So we made recycled crayons. We didn't just talk about it, we did it. My instructional assistant suggested this idea, and she helped me collect all these crayons, and we peeled the crayons and we broke the crayons and we took pictures of each stage. And then I did the melting part, but then we popped them out of the containers and they each got a special bag with their crayons to take home. And let me tell you, their retells were amazing because it was an experience that they had actually done together. So it's relying on those shared experiences and then also bringing in kind of what they're familiar with. And it makes it that much more relevant for them to be able to write about it and talk about it with ease. One of my favorite activities is something I did when I was a kindergarten teacher. So much of the curriculum is about the alphabet and the letters and the letter sounds. And so I had my families fill out a personal alphabet. The directions are that for each letter of the alphabet, they need to come up with one word that has importance for their child or their family. And then I would collect them, and every week, if it was, the letter of the week was, say, for example, what was a good one that the student did that I learned about him? His instruments. P is for piano, and then he also played the drums. And so, say for example, it was P week, and I would say, oh, Dijon says P is for piano. He plays the piano. Isn't that amazing? We didn't know that about Dijon. And then those students just feel so important in that moment. And then you can kind of see connections between different students, similarities. I is typically for ice cream, but it's just fun to see how many people like ice cream. We all have that in common. And then what's different? Well, we all like different flavors of ice cream. So having these words was such a great tool to get a glimpse into students' lives and then to be able to bring those words in. This particular student did not talk a lot in kindergarten. He was a beginner speaker, and I had a really hard time getting him to answer my questions. But when I had all of these words and I knew all of these things that were important to him, it gave me an opening to be able to say, oh, I read that you like sushi. I went out to eat sushi, and just talking to him and making those connections because I had this information from his parents and from his household. In terms of communication, this is another great quote from Geneva Gay. There's a semiotic relationship between communication, culture, teaching, and learning, and it has profound implications for implementing culturally responsive teaching. This is so because what we talk about, how we talk about it, what we see, attend to, or ignore, how we think, and what we think about are all influenced by our culture. And so I love this slide because it really shows kind of a variety of different ways that we ask students to communicate in the classroom. And the way in which we call upon students to share information can privilege certain personality types and also cultural ways of communicating. So when we have this typical raise your hand one person at a time, that's kind of a very traditional way of accessing information, but it leaves out so many thinkers and so many speakers. When our goal is to get so many ELLs to talk, if you have one student raise their hand at a time, it's likely not going to be an ELL student, and then there's likely going to be a lot of other ELLs who are not communicating at all. So then we tend to ask students to talk in partnerships or have group discussions, and we try to find these ways that we can have many more students engaged in thinking and communicating at the same time. Equity sticks is a very interesting manner in which to have students communicate, because I've heard both positives and negatives about equity sticks. Doug Lemov, who wrote Teach Like a Champion, says, cold call, equity sticks all the way. Everybody knows they're accountable. Everybody has to be ready, and therefore everybody's thinking and everybody's prepared. Alfie Kohn says, no way. If you are putting me on the spot to tell me that I have to answer when I haven't raised my hand or I haven't given you any indication that I know the answer or that I want to talk or that I'm ready, that is a huge barrier in having students feel comfortable. That's going to raise their affective filter, and that's going to make them feel uncomfortable. So in taking a strategy like equity sticks, you've got one scholar who says, these are amazing, this is a wonderful strategy. And you've got another scholar who says, no way. So what's the right answer? The right answer is know your students. Some students are super excited and they are really pumped whenever their name gets called and they want to share. Even if they don't know the answer, they want to be called on and they want to share. And for other students, this is very stressful and completely kind of blocks. It's this, what Zaretta Hammond refers to as the amygdala hijack. They're going to be so stressed, their wall is up and they're not going to learn. They're not going to attend to what anyone else is saying because they're nervous it's going to be their turn next. So you really need to know your students in order to gauge whether or not they're going to be receptive to that strategy. I've been in so many classrooms where teachers are so anti-shout out. They don't want anybody, it's chaotic for them. They want to maintain that level of control. They don't want students just saying something when they think it. For certain students, Shout outs represent a cultural way of communicating because we don't raise our hands when we're communicating. If we're sitting at a dinner table or in a restaurant with a group of people, you don't raise your hand to signal that you want to talk. You talk, sometimes people interrupt, sometimes there's overlapping talk, but you need to learn how to negotiate that conversation in order to have turns as both a speaker and a listener. And so I am one that's all in favor of shout outs as long as they're controlled and as long as students know the expectation. Sometimes I'll say, all right, everybody tell your idea. Everybody gets a chance to talk. Everybody may not be able to hear everybody else's idea, but everyone was a thinker. And it was within the comfortable context of knowing that everyone else was going to be talking too. So that if their answer wasn't correct, it's okay because they're part of the group and everyone is just trying their best. So I just like to emphasize that the way that we're asking students to talk really does play to their cultural comfort levels. And so it is important to make sure that there is a variety and that you know your students well enough to know what's going to work and what's not going to work for them. My colleagues and I like to use this game that's called the mixer game. And so we use it in a variety of ways. One example was in kindergarten, having students have a letter card. They find a partner because they're mixing around. They find a partner. They say, my letter says duh. The partner tells their letter sound, they switch and they move on. And in a series of observations, what we found is in one context, the focal student, which we were looking at students of color, particular ELL students, one student was completely comfortable engaging in this kind of mixed partnership, very busy, getting multiple partnerships, buzzing around scenario. And another student really walked the perimeter of the carpet and was totally disengaged. And it took several colleagues really focusing and watching what the focal students were doing during this activity to tell the teacher, your focal student didn't partner at all. And the teacher was shocked because in the busyness of what was happening in the classroom, she didn't pick up on that. And so it was students from the same cultural background. They were both ELL students, yet they reacted entirely differently to this one scenario. And so the teacher who was managing this class realized that she needs to back off and teach about how to partner effectively. Students need to learn specifically how to be in a partnership and how to take turns and how that works before they might feel comfortable just going up to any person and engaging in a partnership with them. So she needed to really take a step back and have that student work with a similar partner multiple times before that student felt comfortable doing a random pairing activity. This is a great visual that shows so many different ways to access prior knowledge. So rather than just saying, well, who can tell me what they know? There's so many different ways. It could be drawing. It could be doing a pre-quiz. It could be a show me. It could be having them look at pictures and asking them what comes to mind. There's so many different ways that teachers can alter this one little snippet of introducing a content lesson or theme or whatever it is. But the ways that you choose to do this may or may not access more information. So again, it gets back to that relationship piece. Know your students, know what's going to work, and certainly try out a variety of things until you kind of can establish what works for this particular group of students so that you find ways that students are willing to share. Maybe certain students are really shy and don't feel like they have the language skills, but they can draw. There are many ways to access information, and using a variety can help you get more information from your students. My district is really big on using precision partners. So again, teaching students expectations for partnering and altering, it's a controlled altering of whose turn it is so that we ensure that everybody gets their time to talk and everyone has a chance and an opportunity. Another way is lines of communication. This is a great way where students line up and they share their response back and forth, and then they scoot down, the lines shift so that students have multiple opportunities to share, whether they're practicing a particular language form or vocabulary word in context. They get repeated opportunities, but with different partners. And so they might find that they're shifting their answer and improving it and honing it and making it better each time they encounter a new partner. Choral response is something that I use. This helps students to feel comfortable. They know that they're not going to be the only voice. These particular students were using agree, disagree cards. I've used choral response in many different ways where I give word options or picture options so students can kind of feel like they're one voice among the crowd. But having a picture helps me to gauge kind of who is not understanding it. So if I have everybody speak a word and I give a word choice, I can't necessarily tell who got it right and who got it wrong just from that general listening. But when I give them something visual to hold up or show me, I can much more easily gauge who needs a little extra support. Talking chips are another great idea of a way to make sure that everybody gets a say. There's this concept of hogs and logs. Sometimes in group conversations, there are people who are always talking, and there are people who are continuously not speaking up because they don't feel comfortable. So giving talking chips is another visual way to ensure that everybody gets a turn. So the rule might be you can have one turn and you can't take another turn until everybody's gone, or you can take as many turns as you have chips, but once your chips are in the middle, then you're done taking turns. So it's a great way to make sure that there's equity in opportunities for conversation. Also, individual reflection. So not necessarily always having students answer and talk within the group, but giving them time to write and share their thoughts that way, because some students aren't as comfortable speaking out in the group, but they still have a lot to say. So giving them an opportunity to reflect and think is great. Also, individual turns. When students get an opportunity to be the teacher, that requires them to use the language and demonstrate the skills, but the other students still have a role. So when the student is being the teacher, the other students are still having that job of being a student, and it's not as if just one person's talking and nobody else is interacting. So there is a time and place for individual turns, and that allows the teacher to kind of gauge what that specific student is doing, but making sure that everybody has a role in that interaction. And then also teamwork. This was an example where I gave everybody a word that matched a picture, and they had to figure out whose word went with which picture because there was only one correct match. And so, as Zaretta Hammond says, giving it that collective activity makes it so that they can't just be independent. They have to rely on each other and work together, which is inherently culturally responsive. These are two of the resources I showed: the culturally and linguistically responsive teaching and learning at the outset, and then also Kagan Structures is a great book that has a lot of different interactive strategies. The last piece, I'm kind of running out of time, but I'm going to continue just to finish because I know that this will be saved and preserved for people who haven't been able to tune in right now. The last piece is using that prescribed curriculum, and even if you don't have the liberty to change the curriculum itself, how are you embedding language and adding language to make sure that you're giving your ELLs the most possible opportunities to talk and engage? This year, I had the opportunity to co-teach in kindergarten, which was a wonderful experience. And we co-taught around the reading curriculum Journeys, which is very scripted, and the expectations are that teachers are using that curriculum. And so what I would do is I would take the weekly theme and come up with a language lesson that related to it, that involved a lot of student talk, a lot of partner practice, a lot of talking, and then we would also pair that with writing or opportunities to record on iPads. So you'll see a lot of sentence patterning charts here because this helps students come up with sentences that are rich and that incorporate kind of the terms and vocabulary that we're aiming for. So with this theme on weather, I paired it with possessive pronouns. I added all the students' names, which gave them kind of that ownership, and they had to put together sentences about what friends were wearing. So for example, Clara wears her raincoat when it is rainy. This could be a collaborative activity because one student could start out with Clara wears her raincoat, and then the other student has to answer when it is, and then fill in that last column of what the weather is. So that helps them to make sure they're listening to one another and doing this collaboratively. And that was followed by students recording on their iPad to give them another chance for output with this particular language structure and kind of the highlight of possessive pronouns that I was looking for. This content was animal homes, and we were working with possessive pronouns, singular and plural. And the students had to choose animals and then complete the sentences. The fox is in its den. The foxes are in their den. And this was challenging. I think in the end, we decided to just focus on plural instead of the singular and plural because that was kind of confusing for students. But it's taking their theme and it's adding language. It's not taking away anything from the reading program. Their classroom teacher did every element she was supposed to. We added language to make sure that the students were talking about the content. This particular week was on wheels and machines, and so we did a lesson on comparative adjectives. So students had to put in 2 of the vehicles and then choose their adjective and make a sentence like the motorcycle is faster than the ice cream truck. So again, they had to talk in partnerships. They had to engage in this. We did some call and response with choices. Then they had to talk with partners, and then they had to write about it. So again, it didn't take away anything from the reading program. It just added language. Another sentence patterning chart having to do with insects, and this particular focus was prepositions. So we paired actions with the preposition words and had students piece these together. This represents a lot of instruction. It wasn't just one particular lesson. We learned the names of all the insects, and then we learned particular particular verbs that would go with each insect. We practiced with a song because that helped them to understand, to remember, and to practice kind of the combination of the insect and the verb. And then also just putting the sentences together helped to have a song. And then we talked about the adjectives of how we could describe it with colors and with different words and size words and things like that. And then we practiced the preposition with hand motions. And then we practiced all the different areas that they could be outside. And then we put it together. So a final sentence might be something like, I see a tiny beetle creeping under the log. Really rich sentences that related to the content, but that really focused on language. My first graders worked on family. Again, another sentence patterning chart. I find these so valuable. So the content was the family, but what I really wanted to work on language-wise was present progressive and past progressive. So I built that into the sentence patterning chart. This is something that students can practice when they come into the classroom in any downtime. We make mini books, so it's not detracting from the content that was in the text, but it's giving them kind of that additional push for language. The kind mom is cooking in the middle of the kitchen. The smart grandpa was not eating near the fireplace, whatever it might be, but it's bringing in those elements of their families. Talking about community, so that the nouns now change. Instead of family members, it's community workers. Same concept of present and past progressive. This time the second graders were also focusing on articles, so they had to make sure they were pairing a or an with the adjective that they chose correctly, because that's something we'd worked on. And then also giving examples and non-examples of what the different community workers would do. So a happy teacher was not rescuing puppies in the fire. An amazing builder is building a house near the school. So they're pairing that together, and then they're creating pages in a mini book. This particular student had parents that had just opened a restaurant. He was so proud of that. The friendly chef was cooking a sweet soup in the restaurant. Great sentence, and it also really helped me see what he was proud of from his family. Same chart, different content. This is about animals. So the adjectives have to do with animals. The nouns are different animals, and then the actions are what different animals would do. The content words in the curriculum were predator and prey. These words are in a 4th grade curriculum when they're also in 2nd grade and 1st grade. So students knew predator and prey. That wasn't hard for them. So this time they had to use the sentence patterning chart to create a sentence, and then their peers had to decide if they were describing a predator or a prey. So Chelsea wrote, the scared zebra was escaping carefully into the water. Was that a predator or a prey? The dangerous snake is eating quickly behind the bush. Is that a predator or prey? The clever lion is hunting quietly in the bush. Is that a predator or prey? And all the classmates had to then say why, and they had to defend why it was predator or why it was prey, what words the author had used that helped them make that decision. I also really like to use these accountable prompts. I've collected these from a bunch of different resources, and then I created this particular visual, but I give this to students when they're discussing to help them use accountable talk and academic language as part of their discussion. So even if they're doing something as simple as agreeing, they're using kind of a frame, I agree with you because, and explaining why, or I like what you said because, and they're including that academic language. There is a list of the resources that I have used for this presentation. I'm going to stop slide sharing and come back to my screen. I know that I'm going over, but I just want to quickly look through my Twitter feed to see if I have any questions. I Doesn't look like it. I hope that you enjoyed the presentation, and if you have any questions, please feel free to tweet at topple_ELD or email me at katie.topple@gmail.com. I'm certainly happy to further the discussion if you have any feedback or questions or comments about what I've said. I also shared the slides in a link that you can access if you'd like to have a copy of the entire presentation. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.